Mr. Pleck, step away from the payroll terminal and keep your hands where we can see them.
What's going on? We're in the middle of payroll process.
Garrison Pleck operated without oversight for 8 years as Chief Financial Officer of Lakefield School District in Missouri. The payroll scheme he built paid 17 people who did not exist, and not one person checked until the day everything collapsed.
We're reviewing employee records that don't appear to exist outside this system.
There has to be a mistake. HR handles those files.
He had spent 5 years constructing a system designed to fail exactly one test. By the end of that week, federal agents would seize 3 desktop computers, 11 external hard drives, and a single manila folder Garrison Pleck kept locked in the bottom drawer of his home office that he had never let his wife open. 17 names, 5 years, $2.8 million in district funds rerouted to accounts he controlled through nominee identities. And the verification step he had spent half a decade engineering around turned out to be a project the new HR director could complete in a single afternoon with a spreadsheet and a stack of personnel files. Before we go any further, I want you to think about something. Your local school district almost certainly has a chief financial officer right now. You probably do not know that person's name. You have never seen their face. They have never stood in front of you and explained how your tax dollars actually move through the district. Tell me in the comments whether you have ever attended a school board meeting where the finance officer presented the budget. Drop your district in there too. And subscribe, because we cover the cases that prove why those meetings matter. Garrison Adler Pleck was born in 1972 in Sedalia, Missouri, a railroad town of about 20,000 people in the rolling farmland of Pettis County. His father, Conrad Pleck, was an assistant county accountant who worked out of a green-tiled office in the Pettis County Courthouse for 31 years. His mother, Loretta Pleck, was a substitute teacher in the Sedalia 200 school district, picking up days at 3 different elementary schools, depending on which principal called her first. Growing up, Garrison watched his father bring home a brown leather satchel of work every weekend. Conrad would spread ledger sheets across the kitchen table on Sunday afternoons and tick through reconciliation entries with a sharpened number 2 pencil. Garrison sat across from him doing his own math homework, and by 6th grade, he could already balance a household checkbook faster than either of his parents. At Smith Cotton High School, Garrison was the kid who corrected the math teacher in front of the class without meaning to. Quiet, reserved. Almost no friends, but no enemies either. The yearbook line under his senior portrait read, "Destined for a desk job, but he'll be the boss." His guidance counselor wrote in his college recommendation that he was, in her words, exceptionally meticulous, organized to a degree that occasionally bordered on inflexibility, and entirely trustworthy with detail work. In 1990, Pleck enrolled at the University of Missouri in Columbia. He chose accounting because his father had told him, repeatedly, that accountants never went hungry in a recession. He worked 25 hours a week at a campus bookstore to cover his expenses. He graduated in 1994 with a bachelor's degree in accountancy and a perfect grade point average in his major coursework. He sat for the CPA exam in November of that year and passed all 4 sections on the first attempt. His first job out of college was at a regional firm in Jefferson City called Holleran & Vance, where he was assigned to the firm's governmental accounting practice. That was the team that handled audits of small school districts, water boards, library systems, and rural municipalities scattered across central Missouri. For 6 years, Garrison Pleck spent every audit season driving from one school district office to another, sitting across conference tables from superintendents and finance directors, reviewing their books with the meticulous attention his father had drilled into him over those kitchen table Sundays. He learned every weakness in school district finance from the auditor's side of the table. He learned which controls were robust. He learned which controls existed only on paper. He learned, above all, which controls no auditor ever actually tested, because no auditor had ever caught anything testing them. In 2001, Pleck made the jump from auditor to client. He took a position as senior accountant for the Tipton RVI School District, a small rural district about 30 miles south of Sedalia. The pay was lower than the firm had offered him for promotion, But the work was steady, and his wife Lenora, they had married in 1999, was finishing her nursing degree and wanted to stay in Missouri. Pleck spent 7 years at Tipton, then 4 years as assistant business manager at the larger Sedalia 200 district, where his mother had once substituted. He learned how to write a board memo. He learned how to package an audit response. He learned how to talk to elected officials who could not read the financial statements they were responsible for approving. By 2015, he was widely regarded as one of the most competent mid-career school finance professionals in the region. In 2016, the Lakefield School District in northwest Missouri posted an opening for Chief Financial Officer. Lakefield was a growing district, about 5,800 students across 11 schools, with a budget over $75 million and a finance office that had been running with an interim chief for almost a year. The board wanted stability. They wanted someone with audit experience. They wanted someone who understood how a school district's money was supposed to move. Garrison Pleck interviewed in late February. The board chair at the time, Patricia Linthrop, would later describe him to investigators as the most prepared candidate she had ever sat across from in her life. He answered every question with specific examples, cited statutes from memory, and showed up to the second-round interview with a hand-drawn flowchart of how he would restructure the district's monthly close process. He was offered the job at $114,000 a year. He accepted before the call had ended. He moved his family to Lakefield in the summer of 2016. Lenora, their 2 children Ashlyn and Brennan, and the contents of a 4-bedroom house packed into a single rental truck. The district threw a small welcome reception in the boardroom on his first day. Sheet cake, punch. 22 people in folding chairs applauding politely. The superintendent at the time, Dr. Whitley Hargrove, shook his hand in front of the board and said something he had said about every senior hire for the last 15 years. That the district was lucky to have him. For the first 3 years, Lakefield was lucky to have him. Pleck's monthly close cycles ran on time. His audit packages arrived complete and organized. Board members who had never read a school district budget in their lives told their neighbors that they finally understood what the numbers meant. He wrote a finance newsletter for the parent community. He took questions at PTA meetings. He coached his son's middle school math team in the evenings. No one noticed when he started. To understand how he started, you have to understand how the Lakefield payroll system was supposed to work. The district employed roughly 840 people across its 11 buildings. Teachers, administrators, counselors, nurses, custodians, cafeteria staff, bus drivers, maintenance workers, substitute teachers on a rotating list of 290 names, paraprofessional aides assigned 1 or 2 to a classroom, sometimes shared between schools. The district's bi-weekly payroll run cut between 1,300 and 1,400 individual paychecks, with a total annualized personnel cost just over $51 million. The system that produced those paychecks was, in theory, controlled. New employees were supposed to be onboarded through human resources. HR collected the I-9 documentation, the W-4, the direct deposit authorization, the benefits enrollment, the background check clearance. HR then submitted the completed packet to the finance office, which entered the employee into the payroll system. The 2 departments were supposed to operate as a check on each other. No name in payroll without a file in HR. But the check had a hole in it. The hole was at the top. As Chief Financial Officer, Pleck had administrative permissions in the payroll system that allowed him to add an employee directly, bypassing the normal queue from HR. The override existed for legitimate reasons: corrections to misspellings, urgent rehires during a substitute shortage, mid-year reclassifications of paraprofessional assignments. The override was logged. The override was, in theory, reviewable. However, no one had ever reviewed it. Not in the 8 years before Pleck arrived, and not in the 8 years after. For every one of those years, the district's outside auditor had performed an annual financial audit. The auditor's procedures included a sample test of payroll entries traced back to source documentation. The sample size was small. The selection was, the auditor assured the board, random. The auditor was the same firm Pleck had worked for in his 20s, Holleran and Vance. The partner assigned to the Lakefield engagement was a man named Bryce Holleran, the founder's son, who had inherited the partnership 4 years earlier and who had inherited Garrison Pleck's friendship along with it. The audit framework that was supposed to verify district finances had been built on the unspoken assumption that the chief financial officer was the trust mechanism, not the subject of verification. The board trusted Pleck because the auditor signed off. The auditor signed off because Pleck prepared a clean package. Pleck prepared a clean package because no one ever asked him for the package he had not prepared. There was one question that would have collapsed the entire structure in a single afternoon. Nobody had ever thought to ask it. The first ghost employee was named Marisol Tenhaven. She was added to the Lakefield School District payroll system on March 14, 2019, at 4:47 in the afternoon, 6 minutes after the HR director at the time had logged out for the day. Her position was listed as a substitute teacher available for assignment across the district's 3 elementary schools. Her social security number was a synthetic combination of an issuance prefix from a deceased Tennessee resident and a serial sequence Pleck had generated using a public algorithm reference. Her direct deposit went to a checking account at a small online bank, opened 3 weeks earlier in the name of a nominee identity Pleck had constructed using the same synthetic identity method. Marisol Tenhaven received her first paycheck on March 28, 2019. $971.42 after taxes. The taxes were withheld and remitted to the IRS and to the state of Missouri. Pleck understood that an irregularity in tax remittance would surface in federal cross-matching long before an irregularity in district personnel files would. The W-2 was generated at the end of the year and mailed to a post office box in St. Joseph that Pleck rented under the nominee name. For the first 8 months, Marisol Tenhaven was the only ghost. Pleck told investigators later, in a proffer session his attorney would extensively litigate over, that he had originally intended to stop after the first year. He had wanted to know if it would work. He had wanted to prove to himself that the structure he had spent 2 decades watching from both sides of the audit table actually had the vulnerability he had always suspected. It worked. Therefore, he expanded. In January 2020, he added the second ghost, a part-time custodian at the district's transportation depot. In April, a paraprofessional aide assigned to Lakefield North Elementary. By the end of 2020, 6 ghost employees were receiving bi-weekly paychecks routed through 4 different nominee accounts at 3 different online banks. The calibration was the critical engineering. Pleck knew that the district's total personnel cost fluctuated year over year by between 2 and 3%, driven by substitute teacher usage, paraprofessional staffing assignments responsive to special education caseloads, and turnover-related overlap pay. Anything that stayed within that 2 to 3% band would not register as anomalous in board-level financial reports. He sized the ghost payroll volume to consume roughly 1.5% of total personnel cost, half the margin of normal fluctuation, distributed across multiple categories so that no single category showed an unexplained spike. He distributed the ghosts across all 11 buildings. No school had more than 2 ghost employees on its roster. The ghosts were structured exclusively as substitutes, part-time custodians, and paraprofessional aides. Categories with high turnover, distributed assignments, and no single principal responsible for confirming attendance on any given day. A substitute teacher who never actually showed up would generate at most a confused phone call from a building secretary, and the building secretary would call HR, and HR would say the substitute was on the active list, and the building secretary would shrug and call someone else. By 2021, Pleck had 11 ghost employees on payroll. By 2022, 15. By the middle of 2023, the full 17. The bi-weekly diverted amount averaged $21,400. The annual diversion averaged $557,000. The 5-year total approached $2.8 million. The money went where embezzled money usually goes. A second home on the Lake of the Ozarks, purchased through an LLC that Pleck managed and that listed Lenora's maiden name on the operating documents. a base boat, a daughter's college tuition paid in cash, a son's pickup truck, a renovation of the kitchen in the family's primary residence that Lenora would later tell investigators she had assumed had been financed through a refinance of the mortgage. Quarterly contributions to a brokerage account in Pleck's name that, by the spring of 2024, held just over $600,000. Pleck personally curated every document that went to Bryce Holleran during the annual audit. He pulled the payroll sample population himself. He generated the sample selections using a process he assured Holleran was randomized. He provided the supporting documentation for every selection. And every selection was, by construction, a real employee with a real file. The ghost employees were never sampled. The structural integrity of the audit had been quietly replaced by Pleck's curation of the audit. No one had ever asked for the population of all payroll names matched against the population of all personnel files. Nobody had ever asked for the one comparison that would have ended everything. Until somebody did. In June 2023, Maren Voss accepted the position of Director of Human Resources for the Lakefield School District. She had spent the previous 11 years in HR roles at 3 other Missouri districts, most recently as an assistant HR director at a district twice Lakefield's size. She was 38 years old, methodical in a way that Lakefield's previous HR director had not been, and openly committed to one project she had described at length during her interview, a personnel records consolidation. Voss had inherited a personnel record system that had been managed loosely for years. Some files were in a digital management platform the district had purchased in 2015. Some files were still in physical folders in the basement of the central administration building. Some employees had files in both systems with inconsistent information. Some had files in neither. Voss told the superintendent at her first one-on-one in July that she intended to consolidate everything into a single auditable system within 12 months. The first step, she said, would be the most basic possible. Every name in the payroll roster matched, one by one, against a personnel file. Dr. Whitley Hargrove approved the project. Pleck, sitting in his office 2 doors down, learned about it on a Monday morning in early August when Voss copied him on an email requesting access to the payroll roster. He provided the roster. He did not panic. He had told himself, for 5 years, that this moment would eventually arrive. That some new hire in some adjacent department would eventually attempt the one verification the existing audit framework had never performed. And he had told himself that when it did, he would have time. He would have weeks. He would notice the project starting, and he would dismantle the ghost employees one by one before the comparison was completed. He would terminate them quietly, citing reductions in substitute demand or restructuring of paraprofessional assignments. He would push the diversions to other vehicles he had not yet built, but had thought about. He did not have weeks. Voss completed the comparison in 11 days. She did it personally, sitting at her desk with a printout of the payroll roster on her left and her access to the personnel record system on her right. She worked through names alphabetically and made a small tick mark next to each name she could match against a file. By the end of the 2nd day, she had identified 4 names with no file. By the end of the 5th day, 11. By the end of the 11th day, 17. She did not, at first, suspect a crime. She suspected sloppy onboarding from her predecessor, the kind of administrative chaos she had been hired specifically to clean up. She drafted a report to the superintendent, listing the 17 names and recommending that HR contact each individual to obtain missing documentation. She sent the email at 4:31 p.m. on August 23, 2023. Dr. Hargrove forwarded it to Pleck at 4:38, asking him to assist Voss in reaching the listed employees. Pleck stared at the screen for 42 minutes. He drafted 3 different replies and deleted them. He went home that evening and could not eat dinner. Lenora asked him if he was feeling all right. He told her he had a migraine. He did not sleep. By the morning he had made a decision he understood, even as he made it, would not work. He would tell Voss the names were in transition, recent hires whose paperwork was still being processed. He would buy himself 3 months. He would dismantle in those 3 months. He would find a way out. It did not work. Voss had already been asked by the superintendent to confirm whether her 17 names corresponded to real people on real building rosters. By the time Pleck's email reached Voss the following morning, she had already begun calling principals. The first principal Voss called was the head of Lakefield North Elementary. She read 4 names from her list: 2 paraprofessional aides and 2 substitute teachers, all of whom had been on the district payroll for between 14 months and 3.5 years. The principal asked her to wait a moment. He pulled up his building staff roster. None of the 4 names appeared. The second principal, at Lakefield East Middle, returned the same result. The third, at the district's transportation hub, the same. By 11 a.m. on August 24th, Voss had spoken to 7 principals and confirmed that not one of the 17 names corresponded to a person any building leader could place. Not in any classroom, not on any custodial shift, not on any substitute call list any secretary had ever used. She walked down the hall to Dr. Hargrove's office and closed the door. The superintendent called the board president that evening. The board president called the district's general counsel. The general counsel called a firm in Kansas City that specialized in public sector forensic accounting. By Monday morning, Russell Tannehill, a forensic CPA with 21 years of experience and a former federal prosecutor on his retainer roster, was on a video call with Hargrove and the board's executive committee. Tannehill's first instruction was direct. Do not confront the CFO. Do not change his system permissions. Do not modify the payroll process. Continue all routine operations exactly as they had been conducted. He needed 2 weeks of normal activity to capture the diversion patterns in real time, and he needed the bank routing analysis to complete before any subject of the investigation was alerted. For 13 days, Garrison Pleck went to work in a building where the superintendent, the board president, the general counsel, and an outside forensic accountant all knew. Hargrove greeted him in the hallway. Pleck attended the regular Tuesday administrative cabinet meeting and presented the monthly cash position to a superintendent who already knew the cash had been hemorrhaging through ghost employees for 5 years. Tannehill's team worked from a second-floor conference room in the central administration building under the cover of conducting a routine pre-audit data extraction. They pulled the routing numbers for every direct deposit destination over the prior 60 months. They identified 7 accounts that received the 17 ghost paychecks across 3 online banks. They subpoenaed account opening documents through federal partners and traced the nominee identities through the documents the banks had on file. Driver's license images that had been digitally manipulated from a single base photograph of Garrison Pleck, with hair, glasses, and lighting, altered. The synthetic SSNs were submitted to the Social Security Administration for verification. 11 were unissued. 6 belonged to deceased individuals. 3 from Tennessee, 2 from Kentucky, 1 from a small parish in Louisiana. Tannehill's 5-year reconstruction matched every dollar of diverted payroll against deposits to Pleck's accounts and significant lifestyle expenditures. The Lake of the Ozarks property, the boat, the brokerage account, the cash tuition payments, the kitchen renovation. Every transaction line on Pleck's personal and family finances had a corresponding offset on the diverted side. The match was complete. The forensic case was airtight before any federal agent had ever knocked on Pleck's door. The FBI took the case on September 8, 2023. Special Agent Cole Barringer of the Kansas City Field Office's Public Corruption Squad was assigned as lead investigator. We are about to get into the part of the story where this all catches up with Garrison Pleck. If you have made it this far, you already know this channel covers the cases that do not get the coverage they deserve. Subscribe if you have not. Drop a comment if you have ever worked at a school district, a city, or any public agency where you suspected the books were not what they looked like. The next 10 minutes are exactly why those stories matter. The arrest of Garrison Pleck did not happen at the Central Administration Building. It happened in the parking lot of a Hy-Vee grocery store in St. Joseph on a Saturday morning at 10:14 a.m. Pleck had driven the 45 minutes from Lakefield to pick up a package from the same post office box he had been using to receive ghost employee W-2 forms for 5 years. The package was empty. The address had been placed under federal surveillance 4 weeks earlier. 2 federal agents approached him as he was loading 2 grocery bags into the trunk of his silver Acura. Agent Behringer. Garrison Pleck? Pleck. Yes, Agent Behringer. Special Agent Cole Behringer, FBI. This is Special Agent Holcomb. We need you to come with us. Pleck set the grocery bags down. He looked at the agents. He looked at the post office building across the parking lot. He looked at his car. He did not move for almost 12 seconds. Pleck. Is this about the ghost employees? It was not phrased as a question. Agent Behringer. Mr. Pleck, we need you to come with us. Pleck. I want to call my wife first. Agent Behringer. You can make a phone call from the field office. Pleck. I want to call my wife first. Behringer let him make the call. Pleck stood in the parking lot for 90 seconds with his phone pressed to his ear, telling Lenora Pleck that he was in trouble, that she should call their family attorney, that he was sorry. He did not elaborate. He hung up. He turned to Behringer. Pleck. I know how this goes. Agent Behringer. Mr. Pleck, you have the right to remain silent. Pleck. I know. Agent Behringer. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Pleck. I know. Agent Behringer. You have the right to an attorney. Pleck. I want to call mine before we go any further. He was handcuffed and placed in the back of the FBI vehicle at 10:21 a.m. He did not speak again for the duration of the drive to the Kansas City field office. He did not speak again to investigators without his attorney present. His attorney, Marshall Crew, arrived at the field office at 1:47 p.m. The proffer sessions began the following week. They lasted 4 months and produced a written record so detailed that the government's trial presentation would be built largely on Pleck's own description of the scheme. He explained the calibration. He explained the synthetic SSN methodology. He explained the nominee accounts. He explained why he had stopped at 17 and never gone to 18. He never explained why he had started in the first place. A federal grand jury in the Western District of Missouri returned an indictment against Garrison Adler Pleck on October 17, 2023. The federal charges included 11 counts of wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. Parvo 1343 and 4 counts of aggravated identity theft under 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 1028A. The state of Missouri, exercising concurrent jurisdiction, filed parallel charges in the Circuit Court of Buchanan County, embezzlement and stealing under Missouri Revised Statutes, Paragraph 570.